Hi, everyone. It's good to have you guys around here today. My name is Damla Adigoke. I'm the head of data lab at the African Leadership Center, King's College London. So you are welcome to our panel today. And I think we all have the abstract of today's. Can you hear me? Please confirm, please, if any of the panelists can hear me, yes. So we're going to share the abstract, the book of abstract, for you to have a view or a glance to view what we are here for. But I think if I can provide a little bit of context. So we have a group of researchers, mainly drawn from colleagues at the African Leadership Center and outside of the ALC at King's. So we thought of organizing a kind of discussion, and we've had several off-site discussions around the subject of ontology and epistemology of peace from the African scholarship perspective. So we thought to organize a particular panel, to collect opinions and thought on meta-narratives and dominant theories on peace discourses in Africa. And in a way, it's also part of the broader agenda of decolonizing African scholarship in a way, and also reorientating it in a way that will reflect true African ideals, and also that would help us to be able to understand Africa from Africans' perspectives. So we chose to focus on peace and conflict scholarships, and also we've had several discussions, both informally and formally, around the subject of epistemologies, of recreating peace concept, and also examining kind of critical views of how people tend to use Western ideas or Western concepts to interpret African reality. So in order to recontextualize some of these discourses, so we decided to collect opinions and papers, both from among ourselves, and also we also welcome other inputs even at the end of this particular, because this is an ongoing project. It's not something that we are going to stop. This is not ending now, so the conversation continues. So if you have in a way, if you have seen the abstract, I'm going to share the book of abstract for you to also go through. And in a way, if you want to also participate in that, because at the end of this panel, we are planning to also convoke a workshop to take the position further, and also have a special issue in the Leadership and Society Journal of the African Leadership Center. And if possible, also have a book proposal in that regard. So with me to discuss some of the sub-themes that we've highlighted today, there is Dr. Bode Fashaki, from the Department of Political Science at the Swedish Defense University, Stockholm in Sweden, and also an independent researcher, Dr. Peter Oderinde. So he finished his PhD in African Studies, I think 2 or 3 years ago, at the University of Basel. So there is Kafui, who is currently doing his PhD in South Africa. And I don't know if Dr. Toto is here from the Institute of African Studies, I think, the University of Ghana, as well as one more panelist here. It's Dr. Shulaja Mayowa. He's currently in Tanzania for a conference, but he's a lecturer in, I think it's an environmental sociologist at the Olabisi Onabanjo University in Nigeria. So so guys, you are welcome to this particular panel. So we hope it's going to be a fruitful and engaging one. So in order not to waste our time, I'm going to start like for each of the members of the for the panelists, you have maximum of 10 minutes to present your paper or the presentation you have to make your presentation. Then we'll take questions from the audience and also from members of the panel too. So, and then we'll wrap up this particular session. I'm Damla Adigoke once again with the African Leadership Center at King's. Yeah, so we're starting with a paper by Kafui Chepo and Obadiah Toto. That's on the future of peace in Africa, rethinking a logic. Thank you very much. Kafui, over to you, please. Kafui? Okay. Yeah.
Damilola, thank you very much for the
can we introduction.
See you? I should think so.
Okay.
Is
Yeah,
it
we can
better?
see it. Yes,
Or
it's
the
better.
lighting is poor?
Yes, it's better. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So thank you very much for the warm introduction and for putting this particular panel together. And let me also use this opportunity to say hello to my colleagues on the panel for agreeing to let us have this very important conversation. So from the abstract, basically what the work between Oboda and myself is trying to do is trying to help us to rethink why, besides all the substantive investment that the international community has made in peace initiatives, Africa still seems to be lagging behind when it comes to peace. And conversely, Africa still holds some of the world's most intractable conflicts, and it's home to most of the world's conflicts. We begin, and in most scholars on African studies, actually, there's always a difficulty when you want to begin thinking of research within the African continent. I know there's been a number of recent studies, especially within the decoloniality strand of research. But before that, even from an Afrocentric or Africanacity point of view, there's always been a difficulty as where Africa should begin for as a reference in research. What we seek to do is that we look at Africa as an idea, as a construct. So basically, what we refer to as Africa today is actually a result of a construct, a colonial construct that we are all subjected to as a starting point in whatever research that we are engaged in. For us, we think that Africa should be seen as an idea that is nuanced in rituals, customs, specific ways of knowing that may or may not be mutually intelligible, languages, customs, rites of passages, and a whole set of cultural norms of reciprocity and reproduction. For us, that provides a useful beginning of what Africa is and how Africa should be approached when it comes to research. Now, African societies in themselves, socially, politically, have their systems that are not very obvious or are not linear, unlike the European political system. And that is why in our work, we seek to also denounce the notion of tradition or traditional. The very idea of saying that traditional system or something is traditional means that it should be compared to something. It can be transformed into something. What that something is always a point of contestation, which means that moving from traditional to modernity, you are trying to reflect something in the image of another. So the other becomes a reference point. But it is important for us to understand that even in the post-colonial state, Africa is still made up of contestations of ideas. Its social and political systems are not obvious or predictive. They are emergent. They constantly revolve. And society in itself is a conflictual space. So the polity is always a reflection of the contestations that keep occurring at different points in time. Now, since the 1990s, Africa has been a theater of peace, and there's been significant resources devoted to that. In all this, and not just in Africa, but other places like Timor-Leste, Afghanistan, but more so, Africa has seen a number of them in Sierra Leone, in Rwanda, in Liberia, South Sudan, and many other spaces still have some form of intractable conflict or are still going through the peace process. Now, for us, we think that it is the linearity in conceptualizing peace clouds the very essence of what the African polity is. And so you see that the current neoliberal or liberal peace building approach takes on the secularity of globalization. And so, and what we know as globalization today, it's a conjunction of Anglo-American transformation of what the world should be, or Anglo-American notions of modernity. And so when you critically look at or you unpack the liberal peace approach, it is very technocratic and administrative. It looks at formal political processes, which is embedded in liberal international norms. How, or perhaps in a way, the Foucauldian notion of governmentality. So this conception of peace fails to unpack the contestations or the interactions between the various proponents or issues that underline the complexity or the complexification of peace within the African polity. And again, when I refer to the African polity, I am not talking about a particular definite polity. I'm talking about the polity in a sense of the various spaces that we find ourselves in, and maybe broadly speaking, what we may define as cephalous and cephalous societies, or state and stateless societies. So in that case, what we know as the liberal peace becomes problematic, because the problematization of peace for us reflects the emergence of Anglo-American transformation of what peace is, or what peace ought to be, which has significantly altered or reduced the complexities of social, political, institutional, economic, cultural ways of knowing or securing a people or securing a polity. These contestations or these nodes of knowing, socially, institutionally, culturally, are all jettisoned instead of what has become to know, or what has become in the traditional literature on peace building as liberal internationalism. Now, we realize that if we need to go back to what peace really means in the African context, then we need to look at Africa as a space of cloud. And cloud meaning that the issues that underpin conflict, or the issues that cause conflict, which needs to be managed or addressed to ensure peace, needs to be seen in the form of a cloud. It is not a linear thing. It is constantly mutating and diverse, very complex. Now, once we accept that, you understand that the local within the African context is made up of multiple causalities, which defeats the idea of, the cause and effect. This linear thinking of cause and effect, to be done away with, we then have to look at the nature of the local in the African context, which applies to what, or the nature of what peace is within the local. And this reflects the complex interplay between the particular and the multiple. And when we talk about the multiple, we are looking at the contestations that are accentuated by norms of relations and reciprocity, the contestations that are resourced or that are influenced by taboos, values, idioms, rituals, and specific people's conception of what peace is or what peace ought to be. And I know Dambula would expatiate on that because he's doing something similar. So I won't delve into that. Now, once we begin to delve into those worldviews of how in-group or intra-ethnic framing of peace that arises out of contestation is, then we begin to reflect the complexities that emphasize why what may seem to be intended actions that causes conflict are often unintended, and why attempts at using technocratic, administrative, or what we know as the liberal peace approach neglects the very essence of conflict, and therefore is unable to forge inclusive peace. In that sense, one would begin to think that the liberal approach to peace building has misfired. And this misfiring is as a result of people's notion of what constitutes peace, defying programmatic logics. So what constitutes peace within the African sense defies a programmatic logic. It defies a linear way of knowing. Now, as such, any attempt at constraining or managing or preventing conflict will lead to reactions from the local in ways that are in ways that the end goal of peace or the end goal of such interventions in conflict spaces are unable to conceptualize. And so, for example, when you look at the UN Joint Framework on Human Security, which was implemented between 2009 and 2014, its conceptualization of human security, or what constitutes human security, and how such an approach to managing or governing or bringing about development and largely peace to spaces of conflict failed to materialize because the local contestations that resolved the conflict in the first place were not conceptualized properly within that particular framework. And to give some examples, in the abstract, we said we're going to look at comparative examples. The Rwandan case has been largely dealt with in the literature. But let me bring one other case, for example, in northern Ghana, to illustrate these local contestations. What we call the northern half of Ghana, which involves 5 regions, has experienced about 26 inter- and intra-ethnic conflicts in the past 3 decades. However, 18 of these 26 conflicts is located in the space called the northern region itself. Now, the issue in the northern region is that peace has been an elusive thing. Besides, after government effort and international donor organizations' effort at arriving at peace agreements, truth commissions, installing chiefs and overlords to bring about peace, or what semblance of peace, still has not been able to achieve its end result. Is a fact that if you talk to the locals, the institutional processes themselves that are adopted to manage peace do not reflect the ideational or the local conception of peace. For instance, something that is coming up recently suggests that there has been commodification of chieftaincy and the processes of chieftaincy in the northern region. So we have 2 groups of traditional rulers. We have the royal class, which are enschemed. So when we talk about enschements in northern Ghana, those are the royal class. Then we have what you call the Tindana, which are the earthly priests, the owners of the land. The processes of installing either a Tindana or a chief are different. But then in between this, we have commoners who also hold certain important positions. And one of them, for example, in Tamale, in northern Ghana, which is the epicenter of the conflict, is what we call the Dakpema. The Dakpema, basically in modern parlance, it's more or less like a servant. But because of the interaction between the local institutions and modern Western political institutions, the Dakpema, who originally is sent by the overlord of Dagbon to collect taxes on his behalf, has gained status within the modern political system in Ghana, because his office oftentimes interacts with the Western political institutions that we have at the state level. So now there is a contestation between the Dakpema, who locally or originally is supposed to be a messenger of the overlord, who is the Yana, or what we call the paramount king of that area. And that alone is one of the, many derivatives of conflict, which keeps recurring every now and then. So in conclusion, all we are trying to say is that it's important for studies on peace, security, and development in Africa to begin by looking at Africa as an idea and not a geographical space. It is also important for us to approach any unpacking or any understanding of peace on the continent from a process standpoint, where we unpack the very norms of reciprocity and reproduction that nourishes society. In doing this, we are able to distill how local institutions interact with formal Western institutions and how there can be a synergy between these institutions in arriving at peace, or what we may call peace at any point in time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kafui, for that presentation. I'm going to invite Dr. Fashaki Akimbodi to make his presentation, but I would like to remind the panelists that we have to strictly stick to the 10 minutes maximum time limit, okay? Because so can
I hope I didn't do more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think, well, we'll talk about that later. So thank you, Kafui, for that presentation once again. We're going to take questions and comments later on that, on your presentation, and as well as on others too. So Akimbodi, over to you, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Damilola, for putting this together and for inviting me and allowing me to present my idea. The idea is evolving, and so I'm just going to speak to the nature of it as it is at the moment. And of course, I welcome all of your comments and contributions and questions. The title of the piece is "For the Maintenance of Peace and Security, Regime Security, and the Pacification Process in Nigeria." This is one of the areas that I'm trying to veer into after my PhD, to look at how the question of peace, appealing as it may be, can actually also become problematic. And in some way, we will see how there can be some kind of connection between what Kafui was talking about, and I believe what the other members of the panel will talk about. So first, of course, to put on the table as a way of, by way of introduction, is the fact that peace is something that we all desire, and it's immaterial what color or form or place that we may be, peace is something that we all desire. Because we believe that where peace exists, then there is possibility for progress, there's possibility for development, there's possibility for security, for prosperity, as a matter of fact, because people can go about their day-to-day business and so on. And then government can do what they need to do and all of that. Important as peace is, I observe that in many cases, peace is elusive. And in fact, where peace is not elusive, when we talk about the African context, we see that the kind of peace that exists is often problematic, what Joan Galton would call negative peace. And I begin to think what could account for this sort of situation that we see, particularly in the context of Africa. This brings me to the idea of peacification. The idea of peacification, what does it mean? What am I trying to talk about? So it is, for me, an evolving concept that I brought out of the idea of securitization. For those that are familiar with the Copenhagen School of Security Studies, they talk about securitization theory. That is the idea that issues can be made a security issue when certain actors determine to make them so. And that when they do so, some things happen that make the situation so tense and political, extremely political, that there is no room for some kind of alternative to the proposition that the actors that securitize desire to advance. So that is essentially the background to this idea of peacification. And for me, the idea of peacification has like three fundamental assumptions. So the first assumption is that peace and security are connected and are often used together and sometimes interchangeably. You know, peace can mean the presence of security, but it can also mean, and security itself can also mean peace, you know, where there is safety, there is some sense of peace. This is, of course, not in absolute terms, because this can often be challenged, but at least I assume that there is a possibility to think like that. And secondly, that like security, which the idea of securitization is talking about, peace can also be socially constructed. That we say that something is about peace does not mean that it is something that is objective, that is something out there that we can say, okay, this is peace. No, we can actually construct in our mind, in our actions, in our speech, in our practice, what peace is. You know, just the same way that securitization, that security can and had been previously constructed. Now, the third assumption is that a construction by holders of regime, the construction of peace by holders of regime, many times is problematic. And it's not only problematic, it can be extremely dangerous. So these are like the three fundamental assumptions: that one, peace and security are connected; two, peace can be discursively conceived; and then three, that the conception or conceptualization of peace, particularly by those in authority, can be problematic. So it is from this point of view that I develop what I define as peacification. So for me, peacification can be seen as a process where state officials, particularly in Africa, use peace as a condition for official action. You know, so actions are taken, you know, for the maintenance of, well, quote and unquote, peace and security, but which invariably means something completely far away from peace and security. And so there lies the idea that you can actually construct peace because you want to keep your regime. And this process of doing so is what I call peacification, you know. I attempt to use two cases to sort of illustrate this point better. In my abstract, there are three, but I think I removed one because it becomes even bigger to be able to develop when you have so many cases to deal with. So the first case is the case of the Abacha regime that attempted to problematize the pro-democracy group as a threat to peace in Nigeria. So that was the first case. And the second case is during the NSAS protest, where the government attempted to also pacify, quote unquote, NSAS protest as a threat to peace in Nigeria. So these two cases, in the first case, the background to it is that pro-democracy groups, in 1993, there was a major election in Nigeria. And in that election, before it was concluded, the then head of state, President Ibrahim Babangida, military president actually, annulled the election and claimed that the election was not free and fair, and that the process to the election was actually marred with a lot of irregularities. And so the election was canceled, and then there was crisis in the country. And before you know what was happening, he stepped aside and brought in an interim government. And the interim government was forced out of power by, another head of state, General Sani Abacha, who assumed power in 1993. And when Abacha came into power, there was a groundswell of protest by, what you call pro-democracy group. There were so many of them, but three among them is the Campaign for Democracy, the National Democratic Coalition, and then the National Liberation Coalition. So these three groups, among many others, fought against the Abacha regime and insisted there should be restoration of democracy. Now, the point that I'm making here is that the Abacha regime began to now frame this group as threats to the peace of Nigeria. Of course, emphasizing the point in my topic that for the maintenance of peace and security, there is a need to pacify, the situation in Nigeria after the 1993 election. So the government began to do all kinds of things to mobilize the military, to mobilize the state security services, and so on, in order to go after people that are considered to be threats to the peace of Nigeria. And in this case, of course, you found very prominent people like Major Mustafa coming up as one of the key figures, and then you found Sergeant Troja, who gave a very gripping account of the things that happened, in Nigeria during this period, and how they were being sort of mobilized, so to speak, by the Abacha regime to sort of take the decision that they took. And they went after a lot of people, killing people, sending people on exile, and all sorts of things. The import of all of this is that you see how the state attempts to make peace, how to construct peace as something that the state was after. But in the real sense, what emerges is that there is, effort to actually advance regime security, which is completely far off from what peace can mean. The second case is almost similar, but it is, of course, with a different set of actors. In this case, you found a lot of young people in 2020, October precisely, coming together to mobilize to resist, killing and brutality by a unit of the Nigerian police. It was called the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SAS. And, this squad was accused of, killing people, of extorting money from people, of doing all sorts of things, and they have a huge account of atrocities that they have committed. Now, you would expect that the government will take this up as something that requires immediate action. But what did we see? We saw that government officials began to point to the action of young people that were protesting as what threatened the peace of Nigeria. Again, you see how pacification is playing out when government began to talk about the protesters as threat to peace in Nigeria. And then, in fact, the last straw, the main point that points to this was when the Nigerian president granted an interview to one of the mainstream media houses in Nigeria, that's Arise News Television, and claimed that the protesters were protesting to unseat him, from power. So there again, you see how government was framing, what could have been seen as an opportunity to reform as a threat to peace. So here we see that, of course, the idea of pacification is common, not only in Nigeria, but I believe in many African countries where regimes begin to frame issues, as threat to their regime. And as I said, this is, of course, clearly linked to the idea that the regime, the security of the regime, is much more important to the regime than the question of peace, as well as the question of security. But of course, this is what, I guess I'll stop here because, as I said, this is a developing paper and the conclusion has not been written. In fact, the full paper has not been written yet, but this is just the idea. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Akibode, for that presentation. So I would want to ask, in case if you have questions for the two previous presenters, before we move to the next set of presentation. If there are people with questions, you can send your questions to me or to the general chat page. If there's so that we can have people, we can take in some of those questions so that we'll be able to, so we can continue. Any questions? Isaiah Kumuyi, yeah, so go ahead, ask your question. Hello, Isaiah, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much for the opportunity. My question is directed to Dr. Fashaki on his idea of classification. I found that very, very interesting. Perhaps because of my connection, I didn't hear how he defined the concept. I was trying to make some notes of his definition of the concept. I would be glad if you could kindly shed some light on his definition of the concept of pacification. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Akibode, can you?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, so thank you very much, Isaiah, for your question. So I said that I define pacification as a process whereby state officials use peace as a condition for official action. So they use peace as a condition for taking certain action. And of course, many times these actions actually end up producing some kind of peace that are far away from what peace may actually mean. So when such actions are taken, what you see actually is the maintenance of regime and not peace. Peace is far from what the conception and practice of state leaders, whose mantra is that actions are taken for the sake of peace. But of course, what you get is that it is completely far away from peace. So this is how, of course, as I said, this is an evolving idea, and that's how I defined it.
All right.
Hello, Isaiah, do you want to respond?
I got that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So any other question or comments? All right, Peter, you can go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, my question goes to the first presenter. I just want to ask, what is peace within the context of the local you was talking about? When you're referring to contestations influenced by taboos. For instance, in our case in Nigeria, when older politicians are playing down the younger ones, and recently they are even trying to bring up a bill of not too young to run bill. So what is the context that you're trying to talk about really with regard to peace?
Thank you very much. In the first place, in my presentation, I made it clear that there's no singularity to the local. What we mean by the local doesn't stop at the national level. Indeed, it can be classified in three. The the macro, the meso, and the micro level. And so our admonition here is that at any point in time, what we may be referring to as peace should reflect the equilibrium of the contestations at the local. And again, as I said, the local is not a singularity. The local in itself has multiple dimensions, and our attention must be paid to those dimensions that constitute the local at any point in time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, on the theoretical level, yes.
All right.
I have some questions here. I think one from Bonfaz, I don't know the name, I can't pronounce the name really. So the question is there any ongoing quest for understanding agential, timely, emergent, generative, and responsive peace by everyday people? As an artist, peace builder, this is my milieu. Yeah, you know, Bonfa, I don't know if I pronounce that your name very well. Can you, like, if is it possible for you to, you know, just like reiterate your question so that, I mean, address your question to the panel, the specific panelists that you want. I mean, the person you want to, you really would like to, the person to address the question you have. I don't know. I'm going to allow you to speak now. Please make sure that you can give the audio to your voice, really. All right. Hello.
All right. Thank you so much for giving the privilege to be able to speak. So my question is, as a peace builder, I'm an artist peace builder and a PhD student, and I'm looking at agential, everyday, timely, emergent, generative kind of peace that comes from everyday lived experiences by everyday people. So, because as an artist, that is the only natural place I can be able to find myself in that space and linking theory and practice. So I just wanted to know, is there any sort of this kind of peace that is not kind of dominant, liberal, state-led peace, so to speak? And what is the format of that kind of peace?
Okay, any of the presenters can respond. Kafui. Is Kafui there? Okay. Hi,
Hello. Hello.
All right, Kafui, go ahead.
Sorry, I was responding to another question in the chat column.
Okay.
May I please know what the question is again?
The question is there any ongoing quest for understanding agential, timely, emergent, generative, and responsive peace by everyday people? So,
well, I think there's been some attempts. The work by Roger McGinty, Oliver Richmond, and co have attempted that. Or, I mean, the scholarship that talks about the local thing in peace building have made some attempts at addressing some of these issues. But then there's still the need to deepen what the local is. Richmond, for instance, looks at the infrastructure for peace and limits that infrastructure to state-centric institutions. It doesn't go beyond that. So there's a need for us to deepen that. So yes, there has been attempts. There's a growing number of scholarship that concentrates on what we refer to as the local thing in peace building. But it needs more in-depth and contextual analysis to actually concretize that idea of the local.
Yeah, in a way, anyway, you're responding to the question by Wanjiru, if I'm not mistaken, on the local. Yeah.
Yes,
so,
that's what I was actually responding to. So I think I've just done it.
So in a way, I think that should also serve as a response. I don't know if if that is happening.
Unless Wanjiru would want me to expatiate on something, then I can go ahead and finish what I was.
If it's also like, I don't know, if you can also address the question by the guy who asked that question about agential and generative peace or something, according to everyday people, responsive peace. I think what I would suggest is just pick an element of this and then maybe you respond. Go ahead. Kafui, go ahead.
Hello?
Hello, continue, please.
Hello? Something is wrong somewhere.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yes, sorry, I lost you at a point.
I can hear you anyway.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
I can also hear you now.
Respond.
I
just
lost
conclude your response, please. What I would
to which
suggest
of the
is that you said you would react to Wanjiru's question also, and would want to I would also want you to address. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway,
I don't know if
I'll put that in the chat box. Don't worry.
Okay, very well.
Yeah, so it's in the chat box now. All right. So in order not to waste your time, really, I think what we'll do is that we'll come back to the question again at the end of the session. So Dr. Sulaja, I can see your hand up. Do you want to speak, ask question or make comments?
Yes, just to add to what Dr. Kafu and Dr. Akimbode have said, that we can have a genuine peace in Africa, and then the approach to adopt in achieving this is to move from bottom to the top. That is, the peace must be achieved at the local, at the community level. Then through that, we can have a national-wide peace, which means that we have to engage the role of rulers at the community level, the traditional rulers at the community level, to also play a critical part in peace and conflict resolution activities at the local level. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I would like to welcome you to make your presentation, Dr. Sulaja.
Thank you so much. But I would like to use PowerPoint for my presentation. I don't know if I'm free to share my screen.
Is it possible for you to share your screen?
Yes, that's what I want to know. If it's possible for me to share my screen.
Hello, we can't see your screen, please.
Okay, I think
it's coming up now. Go ahead. Okay. All right, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, can I
continue?
Continue. Okay. Thank you. My name is Shulaja Oludele, and I'm here to present our ongoing paper, because I did this paper, I'm working alongside with Damilola Adekoke on this particular paper titled Critique of the Theological Presuppositions of Peace, Conflict, Development, Narrative Discourse in Africa. The idea behind this paper is just to look at the various perspectives that has been put forward by scholars within Africa and outside Africa continent, to what peace actually mean, and to also see if these perspectives or ideas that have been, portrayed to represent what peace means, is actually obtainable on the African soil, and how, to what extent are this worked out. And also we have the intention of also interrogating how peace, affect the relationship, let me use that word, relationship between peace, conflict, and development. To say that we actually want to know if truly peace means absence of conflict, and then if truly absence of conflict means development, or could lead to desirable development. However, we are using experiences or realities in Nigeria as a case to examine this particular issue at hand. Then, as a background to the study, to this paper, we tend to look at what teleological means. And by teleological, by definition, it means that an action, taken by an individual must be as a function of a target or goal or purpose that individual aim to achieve, and that there is always a reason for every action, and that there is no particular action that is totally wrong or good, subject to the idea behind that particular action. It is the idea that is the consequential effect of that action that will determine whether such action is good or bad. Then we also tend to look at peace in our own perspective, to see that peace is a predicted social order conceivable through instrumentality way of pressure, violence, and the risk of it. Why we see this in this direction is because with the reality in Nigeria, we have a kind of a kind of insecurity or crisis that is ongoing now. But however, we cannot say that despite the fact that we have this happening in Nigeria or in some part of Nigeria, we cannot say that Nigeria is not at peace from our own understanding. Because when you get to Lagos, you still see people going around doing their business, going around their daily activities. Shops are opening, banks are operating, everything is going on normal. But when you move to the north or to the northeast, where we have the Boko Haram terrorist group operating over there, you discover that there is another, it's a different ball game entirely, which means that within Nigerian environment or Nigerian state, we have both a peaceful environment and at the same time a conflict situation environment, which means that the two concepts, peace and conflict, could occur in a particular society simultaneously. And then that is the reason why we see peace as a predicted social order. We assume that peace does not really mean absent of conflict. But however, it means the ability of those who are in charge of situation in a given society to manage that conflict, in order to ensure that peace reign, or there's a peaceful cooperation in that given society. And also we see conflict as a disagreement, which is inevitable, where you have people coming up with different perspectives, different interests, coming up with compatible goals, and most especially a country like Nigeria, where you have different ethnic groups and then religious sects, coming up with their own interest that this we can also refer to it as being personal, you know, and then this makes the country to be prone to maybe ethnic crises or religious clashes and other form of social unrest that you can think of. So, and the concept development, we see it as an improvement in the standard of living of the people, you know, in terms of the economic situation being improved, the social being improved, the environmental condition to being improved in terms of ensuring that the environment is clean, is healthy, and people living in a given society can also. So, and security, which is very important. So when you're talking about development as well talking about guaranteeing the security of lives and property of the people. That's the background. Now, let me quickly go into okay, into I've discussed this as well. The major discourse, you know, looking at the meaning of conflict, peace, and development in Africa. Like what my previous panelists have discussed, or the insights that they have provided, it's so glaring that the concept of peace is problematic. It's problematic in the sense that we cannot actually have a universal definition to what peace means, you know, and the concept peace is relative, and it's a function of individual perspective to what peace may mean, you know, at that level. So that's brought the idea of we looking into the perspectives that has been put forward by scholars within and outside African soil. Basically, we have this positivist perspective to peace, who believe that peace means total absence of conflict, violence, or any kind of disorder in a given society, and then that peace is necessary or is important to achieve desirable development in any given society. And also the idea of the realist, who believe that no, there is no way conflict, there is no way to define peace without mentioning or emphasizing the presence of violence in the definition. The realists believe that the peace is not something that is achievable in a given society because conflict is inevitable in a given society. So why then that is the perspective of the realist. And then we also have the idealist, who believe that though they know that conflict is inevitable in a given society, however, they still have this notion that peace is achievable, if despite yeah, I think that is where we want to portray our paper, that we can have conflict going on and at the same time still achieve peace if we are able to manage the conflict effectively. And that now brought us into the idea of African peace, African peace. Then that's or African perspective to peace. Then that's raised the question that we tend to answer in our work, and that question is simply trying to say that what type of peace, you know, do African countries should strive to attain, you know, because we assume that what represents peace in a given society or in a particular society might not be what represents peace in another society. To the west or to the European state, what constitutes peace there might not be what we actually constitute African peace. So that's tend to lead us to this kind of question that what kind of peace do Africa need? Then in doing this, we also have at the back of our mind that peace is not a weapon to develop people to become means to an end. Rather, it should be a weapon to develop them to become ends in themselves. Which means that with peace, individuals or people of a given society should be able to develop their potentials, should be able to have access to existential needs of life, should be able to carry out their business activities to the best of their ability, and then they should also have the freedom to participate in politics, religion, practice any form of religion they like, without any form of hindrances or obstacles. So, in that, we actually go through into the literature to see how the African scholars have been able to portray what peace means, and then the way they are relating peace to security and then development. We were able to quickly come up with these 4 perspectives. The first one is the fact that peace is seen as the acceptance of an existing status quo. This was a view from Botha as regard what's going on in South Africa, during the apartheid and thereof, that the Botha believed that to maintain peace is just to accept the current situation and then leave it like that and do not. So in that, many scholars argue that, look, it is not supposed to be, because you cannot maintain a status quo that is domineering, that is actually meant for the rich to continue to be richer and the poor to continue to be poorer, or that does not give equality in terms of assessing basic needs of life like education, like housing and all of that. That is not the kind of peace that they want. And I think this kind of peace is being described in most of the literature as being dialectical and contradictory to the people's peace, which means that it's not coming from the masses. It's not focusing on the masses. It's actually talking about the few, the capitalists and whatever. So we also have Erat, who define peace, more of on the part of the people seeing it as a freedom of the mind, or freedom of the mind from annoyance, distraction, anxiety, obsession, tranquility, and serenity. It means that the peace should be within, the intra peace, intrapersonal peace, and then when you have the peace of mind, then you can actually translate that into the general peace that we want in the society. That that is on view. Then we also have Olayinka, who sees peace as a social situation in which multiple way of life, wherein multiculturalism is respected, multi-idea is respected, multi-religion are also cherished. In that context, we can see peace from something being inclusive in nature, that you have to accommodate individual differences, shortcomings, be able to be nice to one another, regardless of your ethnic affinity, your religious affinity, your level of education, the social class you fall into or you belong to in the society. Then once we have this orientation about being inclusive and coming together to see ourselves as one, then we can actually talk about what peace. So we also have peace, being connected to various aspects, religion, education, social factors, and and the likes. Now, the issue, another issue is basically, okay, let me say this, at the end of the review of the literature, we tend to come up with a kind of definition. Though I think we can still go into it to see, because it's somehow voluminous. And then let me quickly say that from African perspective, we see peace as one that enable the majority of the people to enjoy physical security, satisfaction of basic needs of human existence, emotional well-being, political efficacy, and psychic harmony, in terms of people having the mental and emotional balance, the stability in their mental health and the other aspect of life. Then we think that is how African people are able to portray peace. And then we observe that peace from African perspective is also multidimensional. It's not just a linear way. It's not a linear perspective that we are having people having different perspective to what it is, which means that this is also what socially and culturally constructed, and it's make it vary from one society to another. And finally, we want to say, though the paper is still ongoing, this just that to say that peace, the understanding of African peace is not immune from the Western orientation about what peace means, and it's not immune from the Western domination of the global economy. They control almost everything, and they really allow the African people to have this, the balance of power when it comes to global economy issues and all of that. And that also tends to make the process of achieving peace on African soil to be very difficult and challenging because of the external factors, external influence that is coming into the African soil and making more complicating the process of achieving peace and then development. So we then assume that it's important to know that an understanding of African perspective on peace, conflict, and development is relevant to achieving sustainable peace in today's global world.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sulaja, for that presentation. Before we take the next presentation, I would like to welcome one of the panelists. But I think for reason of bad internet access, he was not able to join us from the start, and that's Dr. Udaya from Udaya Totu from Ghana. So, and I'm going to ask him to respond to something just briefly for like 1 minute or two before we move to the next presenter. And is Dr. Budaya there? Can you put up your camera so that we can see you? Hello? Yeah. Okay, sorry. I'm not getting any response really from him. So is it there? All right. Yeah, just a minute. Okay. Now I would want to invite.
I'm not sure. Damilola, I'm not sure he's currently. I'm not sure he's with us currently.
All right. All right. I saw the name pop up. Yeah. So Dr. Derinde, over to you. You can make your presentation. Because of time, I would want to advise again that we limit ourselves to that 10 minutes. And Sulaja, please, can you please like put down your presentation, your slide? All right. So over to you, Dr. Peter. Go ahead. Yes, we can hear you. I can hear you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oderinde Peter Ayola, and before I go into my presentation, really, I'm going to turn off my camera so I'll be able to make through the presentation and the rest of the panel as well. But for the sake of introduction, I'll just leave it on still. I got fired up by the last presentation when it was talking about the management of conflict, but I was happy in the latter stage of the presentation when we talked about peace as being multidimensional and then nature. So I was quite happy because when it was talking about having a relative peace in the Southwest and then peace in the North, that totally is not true. And that speaks to my paper now on NSAS. I think when we are talking about peace, we should also think about the non-spatial environment where we have people making comments, and then the wave of fake news nowadays is not just making anyone to know what to believe. So without further ado, I think I'll go into my presentation and then I'll stop the video for the sake of convenience. The title of my paper today is Post-Truth Politics, NSAS Agitation and Post-Truth Politics in the Post-COVID-19 Lockdown in Nigeria. I'll begin this paper by stating that NSAS protest is born out of personalizing the executive power of the government and the decadence in the socio-economic and political fabric in the Nigerian state. So in my presentation today, I'll be talking on the flip side of peace, or the ontology of peace. So I'll be coming from the angle of protestation and contestation rather. However, the NSAS protest is not one of the major protests that we've seen in recent times. There's the Occupy Nigeria, which happened in 2012, where the then government tried to remove the petroleum subsidies, which allowed Nigerians to buy petrol at a low price. And that sparked negative reactions and everybody took to the streets. There was another example in Bring Back Our Girls protest, which about 276 schoolgirls were kidnapped in Chibok. By the eve of the 2015 general election, there was a massive uncertainty in the perceived political and economic marginalization, which is also exacerbated by ethnic, religion, and regional divisions across Nigeria. By 2015, I think the exchange rate of $1 hovered around 188 naira. That was the highest rate of dollar at that time in 2015. And of course, amid this hardship, terrorism took a new turn when a man blew himself up on a motorcycle rickshaw near a fish market in Maiduguri. So prior to the 2015 general election, Boko Haram had also had set foothold in the Federal Capital Territory in Nigeria as well. So there was this air of uncertainty around the election in 2015 before we have President Muhammadu Buhari being declared as the winner. And many Nigerians voted for him on the back of the fact that all of this aforementioned the factors that I talked about. So they came out and voted for him because they wanted change. And then they promised a social contract of fighting a triple war of economy, security, and corruption. But however, this social contract quickly turned into something else. And then when he came on board, he made a speech that I belong to everybody and nobody. This gave the country a breath of fresh air. However, there's a problem of personalization of power in every public institutions in Nigeria. For instance, we can see it in the case of the Twitter ban, when the Nigerian government banned Twitter. It wasn't as if the Nigerian government banned Twitter because of the indigenous people of Biafra that are always trying to secede, or because the NSAS protesters used more of Twitter to organize their protest. No, it was because of a tweet of President Muhammadu Buhari that was brought down, and that was why Twitter was banned in Nigeria. Also, we can see cases of personalization of power in every institution. For instance, a clerk in every public institution becomes a demigod that one has to pay some obeisance to. as well, we've also seen in the case when the Economic Crimes Commission, Economic Financial Crimes Commission was established, Nuru Ribadu, which is the head, was the EFCC personified. We also saw recently in the case of Attorney General Malami, who can single-handedly withdraw cases from the Supreme Court on the claim that the federal government has the constitutional right to withdraw any criminal case at any time. And recently also we saw the case of the Minister of Education with the Nigerian Association of National Association of Nigerian Students. His demeanor on how it worked out shows that these people are arrogating their office to themselves. So I'm narrowing my presentation down to the executive arm of government. Of course, I've given these instances to show that there's an example of personalization of power across every public institution, but I'm sticking to the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which is the SAS, which is an arm of the police, which is under the executive arm as well. So, on post-truth politics in NSAS protests, what does post-truth politics itself mean? According to Alison Flood, post-truth occurs in a circumstance in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal beliefs. And one of the features of post-truth politics involves the control of the media by the state. It also involves political instability and national interest in international politics. For example, we saw during the NSAS war, there was a fake tweet suggesting that the military would not shoot the protesters wielding the national flag. Post-truth politics also occurs during electionary campaign and contesting election results. I think this morning there was in the news that the Ebonyi state governor should vacate his position because he cross-carpeted. So manipulation to gain mass appeal had its root in pre-independence political parties in Nigeria. Intrigues surrounding ethno-political formats in pre-independence Nigeria, such as the National Council for Nigeria and Cameroon's NCNC Action Group and the United Party of Nigeria, to name a few, kind of form a news outlet that spoke against the ills of colonial government, and many of them talked about decolonization and eventual independence. And then these media outlets later turned into state-owned outlets. And over the years, due to the democratization of the media, there were also independent media outlets who also provided some sort of an alternative fact to what the state-owned media are doing. And nowadays, it's even difficult because the internet is now in the foray, which means that for anyone has become a publisher, and this has is both a blessing and a curse, which means it has both advantages and disadvantages. So the wave of fake news may have started from the ascension of Donald Trump to the United States presidency. And we can see it's back and forth with CNN, and also the example of Brexit, with the kind of information they're chalking out, and with the rise of right-wing politics in the Western world. So Nigeria too is also following suit and trying to inaugurate the what I call it speech bill, what is called hate speech bill. So my paper approaches the analysis of the protests, the NSAS from an ethnographic perspective, and discusses the overt and covert causes of the NSAS protests. If one takes the term post-truth on the face value, the prefix pre is the opposite of post, which signifies that there was a truth, or rather a truth that existed earlier that differs from the original. Post-truth politics is also associated with politics of authentities. That is, the democratization of the media encourages multiplicity of ideas, making authentic information a scarce commodity. So post-truth politics was exploited as a reason to crush Nigeria's NSAS protest. For instance, historians will agree that the fact of the NSAS movement is sacred and that certain events are just too factual. Although there's speculative history, the task of the historian is not speculative when analyzing post-truth politics as a tool for crushing the NSAS protest by the Nigerian government. There are always sides or different sides to an event, but the task of the historian, like I said earlier, is to decipher who's saying the fact and who's causing mischief. In whatever manner people struggle to diffuse the issue or mesmerize the fact of the events are not always as easy as presumed. For instance, when we take the case of the belligerents in the World War I, every belligerent state had a reason for going to the war, but no historian would argue that the World War I started in 1920. So at some point, the protesters, which in fact the police acted as a cover for, snowballed into violence, and the protests which started peacefully grew into or turned into violence. How did that start? At some point, the protesters were seen as saboteurs, as if they were those who wanted to change the government through illegal means. What is the truth in the context of the government? Whose truth? My truth, your truth, or our truth? However, the truth, even though that may not be absolute, and this is the historical account of the events that happened on the 20th of October in 2020. So what do I mean by over-personalization of power? There are several issues that culminated into the NSAS protest. The Special Anti-Robbery Squad is an ad hoc police unit that was created to cater for a particular event in Nigeria, which was the high rate of armed robbery in Nigeria at the time. But it grew to become this Frankenstein monster that could not be tamed. There were several harassments and unlawful arrests, and even extrajudicial killings of many youths. I'm sure if you are a Nigerian youth, you must have encountered the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. I myself have several encounters. So this eventual, this harassment led to several protests, and which eventually snowballed into mobilization of youths across the country, both in online and offline. And at some point, government came in with talks to intrude on the protesters. So the government adopted a propaganda strategy and blaming the protesters. At some point, they were even saying no one was shot and no one was killed during the protest. I think that's the highlight of my paper, when the government is putting out information as to saying no one was killed. Eventually, there was a judicial panel that was inaugurated, and that's just another problem between the federal and state government. I mean, that's the problem we have in our political structure in Nigeria. So the panel of inquiry came up to say that people were killed, some protesters were shot, as against what the government is talking about. Now, if you go on Twitter, you will see that even if the youths are saying, yes, we've got some vindication that at least an arm of the government in Lagos State, for instance, is saying truthfully people were killed, but we still want some vengeance. So people are still aggrieved, and we are waiting for the government to come up with the white paper. Even though they said they came up with the white paper, it's still classified at the moment. So the piece in this context is hanging in the balance. I think I'll stop here and I'll see if anybody has questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Oderinde. Because of time, we're going to take one or two questions because we have just like 4 minutes left. We're not going to take my own paper, partly because I'm sharing this panel. At the same time, we have very limited time. We have very limited time left. So maybe at a special seminar or the other workshop that we're going to convoke, I would have the privilege and opportunity to present my experiences researching peace among indigenous communities in Nigeria. Let me not say in Africa now. So having said that, I'm going to leave if you have any question to ask the presenters, this is the best time for us to do that before we wrap up this session. Thank you very much, Dr. Oderinde, and all the panelists who have made presentations so far. So any question? Yeah. Okay. Oh. Okay. Dr. Oderinde, there's a question for you. Yeah. Hello. Okay. The question is that okay, on the question of peace, that's the NSAS protest, what the president referred made, that how do you harmonize or conceptualize peace now in terms of using local context to interpret the NSAS? I mean, the experience of the NSAS. Is there a way? Can we really find a kind of African peace in the story, in the discourse of the NSAS, the entire event itself? Is there a way? I don't want to say it's historicized, but is there a way we can situate a localized or a form of local conception of peace in that regard to make sense of the entire thing? Yeah.
I think that question is a very rhetorical question. I think that it goes back to my first point, that what is the peace in the context of the local from the beginning. And I cited the example of not too young to run beer in Nigeria. For a very long time, the political class, I've seen the youths as the leaders of tomorrow. That's the idea. They are not supposed to be on the political terrain as they. In fact, there was a notable argument between Showore and one minister at the radio station arguing about the age, and he was telling him to go and queue up. So I think one solution, I think nowadays it's very difficult to find peculiar solutions because of the globalized world that we found ourselves. But I think we can start to conceptualize peace by transforming our political space, bringing the youth into this project, so-called Nigerian project, because the youth are the leader of tomorrow, and bring them on board and bring them onto the table and ask for their opinion on what's going on.
All right. Yeah, thank you. With that, I would like to draw the curtain on this session, and we'll hopefully next. We are almost we're on the dot, please. We need to shut down this session, please. Yeah, because we are sticking to time, please. So at a post-panel session that we're going to call at some point, there will be opportunity to also collect our comments and also make further presentation. Thank you very much to the panelists and to all those who attend, who have you have already dedicated a particular chunk of your time to participate in this panel. So we thank you very much and see you guys. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.